So we're into day 2, you know. Fired up this saw, got it running, did a video on first impressions, and it all was good, right? So I was going to take this thing out and test it against an X-Torq just to start that discussion of what you get on something like this versus buying, you know, a new saw. And most people are going to start out the conversation saying, well, what about the performance? So I wanted to get that out of the way, go up, cut some cookies. Now, ultimately, to me, that's a waste of time. But I also recognize that the community that is watching this, that's very important. To me, it's not about how fast you cut the cookies. It's how long you cut them fast enough. But before I even got started, before I even was able to start my little thing, issue number 1. Well, we've had the few issues in the construction of this thing, but oil pump's not pumping oil. Now, is it the oil pump or is it the oil pump pickup tube to the, you know, the bar oil tank? I really don't know what the issue is. And to be perfectly honest, I really don't care. And I don't have time to try to debug each individual component. But what I do have time to do is to go into my junk pile, because I'll tell you what, I got a lot of junk from 372 X-Torqs to pick through, because I've got a lot of them that just did not survive the test of time. Is that going to get me a little hot water from my friends? Possibly, but I don't care. I'm really about being straightforward and honest and making sure I document my experience without any bias at all. That's what this channel's always been about. Now, it's hard because I like Husqvarna's. John's Thread more than Husqvarna is my favorite brands. But when it comes to trying to advise people about what they should do, I have to take all my thought process relative to my favorite saws out of it and just be absolutely straightforward on what I find. So that is what's happening here. See, that's doomed to fail. That's just not ever going to be right because of the way that spring is ground. So that part, there's nothing you could do to that part to make it right. So what I'm going to do is just pulling off a dead 372 and stick it on there, that's all. Kill switch works, anti-vibe works, still no oil. Well, the only thing I have not changed is that little brass tube. That's frustrating. Alright guys, what could that be? Could it be that brass tube plugged? I've never seen that before. The other thing it could be is the worm gear. It's not the tube. All right, you got to see this to believe it. That's a plug. No freaking kidding. So I probably threw away a perfectly good oil pump. I'm going to leave it on now. But that is not a through hole. Can you see it? I guess what I should do is just open it up, right? It's open now. Now let's see if we have bar oil. Can you believe that? That's the kind of crap that drives me nuts. I gotta tell you, that is exactly the kind of stuff that drives you nuts. Alright, let's see what we have now. We now have bar oil, so I now have a saw that I can actually run and test. That was Farmer Jones 660, and the chain has been untouched. The saw is exactly as it came back to me after it had been used by a logger for a little while. And the chain doesn't feel bad, but you know as well as I do, it probably has a little bit of time on it. I also had it run out of oil, so I had to put some bar oil in it, so I just wanted to get a couple of cuts of that saw just to see if it still runs. I think it does. Next up is that one right there. It's a 562. The chain probably has a couple hours of time on it. So, you know, it's not perfect. But what we're going to do is take that same bar and chain and swap it over to first the Huztl 372 and then second 372 X-Torq. I want to give you folks who watch the channel just an idea of how that Huztl 372 runs relative to some other saws that you're familiar with in the channel. This being one. Now, it really doesn't matter if that chain is very sharp, and it really isn't. I can tell you that right now, because I'm going to run that same bar and chain on the other two power heads. So what it is, it's one relative to the next, not whether or not this one is fast. Alright, next up is the Huztl 372, and it doesn't have any time on it. To think this is a definitive number, it's really not accurate, because once this saw breaks in, it'll be a completely different saw. But let's just get it fired. Alright, there it is. That is a strong saw in anybody's book right there. That is actually quite surprisingly strong. And that's with a 50mm top end. So, again, this saw right here is a lot of the parts are just as it came out of the box. And you saw how it cut. Now let's see how it cuts relative to an X-Torq. You know, an OEM saw. And I'll tell you what, I bet this saw here gives it a run for its money. Alright, last but not least, this one has the same bar and chain that the Huztl 372 aftermarket part saw has, you know. So this is a comparison between the two saws, which is pretty fair. The only thing in the favor of the X-Torq is the log is getting smaller. So, like I've said a whole bunch of times in the past, this isn't scientific. This is just like orders of magnitude. as fair a comparison as I can make right there. So what did I learn from this exercise right here? I learned that the Huztl saw runs a lot better than I expected it to, and the X-Torq is still a good running saw. It's a little bit heavier. The torque on the X-Torq feels a little better. That chain is about whooped. The saw that's going to suffer the most on that chain will be my 562, because it doesn't have the torque to pull through the dull, dull chain. Both those saws, the X-Torq and the Huztl 372, have got a lot more punch on the bottom to pull through that dull chain. I would say, as an analysis, I would say that the 562 with a sharp chain will just about keep up with those two saws. And I would also have to conclude, based on the feel, just that very short period of time, that the X-Torq has more punch on the bottom and can handle that dull chain better than the other two saws. But it feels heavier. It feels solid. The OEM saw feels solid. I think part of it's just because of the weight. The other thing I relearned is my 660 is a beast. Even with a dull chain, that thing just tears and rips. Rips and tears. That's quite a saw. There's no way the 372 is ever going to match that power. I don't care what the times show here. That 660 is a monster. It is an absolute beast in terms of power. But I guess what the conclusion is, whatever you guys decide. What I can say quantitatively is this, is that 372 aftermarket part saw runs well. There's no doubt that's a good running saw. You will not be disappointed on how it runs, just the way it is right there. A couple of things that I got to point out is this is not scientific, and I've said that a bunch of times. It's only one tank on that Huztl 372. It will break in, and it'll either break up or it'll break in and get faster. First impression, though, is that damn thing runs. It runs good. It's a match of that X-Torq, is my hunch. We get back and put it on the editor, I'm going to find it to be a match. The Huztl 372 definitely has old style 372 type running characteristics. And I'll tell you what, it's a toss-up in terms of which one you'd pick up. So based on that alone, I would say that kit and the way it runs is an absolute success. It's definitely an option for the people who like to build kit saws. And being a Husqvarna based design, it's a lot easier to work on than the steels. It's just the way they are. I know it's going to get some people miffed, but the layout of that class of Husqvarna about as easy to work on as any saw in existence. So obviously the saws based on that pattern are going to have the same characteristics that way. But as a kit saw, that damn thing runs. That thing is a success. I can't say it enough. But anyway, take the old green meanie and go home.